In this final hour before the return of Yeshua, there is quite a bit of talk about a third temple and a red heifer. So in this two-part study, I want to go into what the red heifer actually symbolizes and then draw some conclusions. So let's start by comparing the law for the red heifer to that of the Yom Kippur bull sin offering. The red heifer is slain outside the camp, and although in the law for Yom Kippur, we are not told directly where the bull is slain, we are told that the goats are presented before Yahuwah at the door of the tabernacle. And in the law for the sin offering, we are told the bull is slain at the door of the tabernacle. And the same goes for the bull for burnt offering. So the Yom Kippur bull is slain at the door of the tabernacle. Next, the blood of the heifer is sprinkled 7 times toward the tabernacle, which is where all other offerings are presented and slain. So this symbolizes that the heifer's sin is against God, his house, and everyone in it, both good and evil. On the other hand, the blood of the bull is sprinkled 7 times upon and before the mercy seat, symbolizing that his sin is against God, his throne, his sanctuary, his saints, and the true worship of him. Finally, the heifer is burned completely outside the camp by someone other than the priest. And while it is burning, the priest adds cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet to the fire. I will be going into this in part 2. And afterwards, all of the ashes are collected and kept without the camp for water of separation for purification of sin. The Hebrew for this is meh nida hatat. Make a mental note of the nida part, as we will come back to this later. The bull is also burned outside the camp by someone other than the priest, but its ashes are not collected. Instead, its fat is burnt on the altar of sacrifice beforehand, so neither is a total loss. Now, we saw in the Yom Kippur study that the bull represents the high priest and the congregation. It is portrayed in Revelation 12 as a dragon when representing the priesthood, and in Revelation 13 and Daniel 7 as a beast when referring to Israel. So who does the red heifer represent? In Revelation 17, we see a woman identified as Babylon riding a beast. And this woman is decked down in purple and scarlet, gold, precious stones, and pearls with a cup in her hand. And all of these jewels are related to the temple, except possibly the pearls. This woman is Jerusalem, the faithful city who has become a harlot. And not only is she a harlot, she is also the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. The abominations are the images of idolatry, as in the beast she is riding, who is the spitting image of his father, Baal. So who are the harlots? We rarely see the phrase sons of Jerusalem in scripture. More often, we see the sons of Zion, while Jerusalem more frequently has daughters. On the cross, Yeshua calls the women of the crowd who were wailing for him daughters of Jerusalem. So the women of Israel are the daughters of Jerusalem. So why are some of her daughters called harlots? In Ezekiel 8, which foretells the destruction of Solomon's temple, we see the women weeping for Tammuz. And Jeremiah 44 corroborates that the women were idolatrous and burned incense to other gods. And not just that, they were foremost in this sin. So here, the corrupt woman further corrupts her husband, which leads to corrupt children, resulting in a kingdom of defiled priests living in a defiled land, just as we concluded in the hidden priesthood study. Now let's look at the cup. We are told that the cup in her hand is filled with abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And this image is pretty graphic. The first fornication we see is adultery, because this beast is certainly not her husband, Yahuwah, which means she is also guilty of idolatry. Second, she is riding a beast. And even though she is also a red heifer, here she is being portrayed as a woman. So this is also bestiality. So what is this woman doing in the wilderness or outside the camp? People are put outside the camp for certain types of uncleanness. The first being leprosy. We see this with Miriam when she spoke against Moses' wife. The second is a running issue out of the flesh. For a woman, one example of this would be menstruation, which brings us back to the word nida. And while menstruation does render a woman unclean, since it is a monthly reminder in every woman of who bears the iniquity of the first sin, the first bloodshed, even though it was committed by her son, and death in general, it does not require a woman to be placed outside the camp. But there is a tie-in here. In Ezekiel 24, Yahuwah says, "Woe to the bloody city," and calls it a pot whose scum is therein, and whose scum is not gone out of it. He then rebukes it for shamelessly leaving its blood out in the open on top of a rock rather than covering it with dust. In verse 11, he says to empty the pot and set it on coals, so that its brass will get hot and burn, its filthiness will be melted in it, and its scum may be consumed. The word here being tamam. The scum is sickness, which I believe represents the leprosy. The bronze represents knowledge, referring us back to the garden. And the filthiness refers to menstruation. Now, verse 13 says that her filthiness is lewdness, which includes fornication between a man, woman, and then her daughter, and also prostituting your daughter. So all of this was happening during her monthly impurity. This is echoed in Ezekiel 22, where in listing the bloody city sins, they include bloodshed, idolatry, the men discovering their father's nakedness, which is fornicating with your own mother, and also fornicating during menstruation, which is forbidden. The third is being defiled by the dead. And since she is getting drunk off of the blood of the saints and martyrs, she is certainly guilty of their murder. Now, we are also told that this woman is burnt by the beast. So why is she burnt? Leviticus 20:14 says that if any man takes both a woman and her mother, all three are to be burnt. And we already saw that this was part of her lewdness, but there is more to it. In Joshua 6, we see Jericho and everything in it being burnt, but the metals are put into the treasury of the house of Yahuwah. And this city is burnt because this is the instruction given in Deuteronomy 13 for any city where the inhabitants say, "Let us go and serve other gods," which we have not known. So this is the penalty for an idolatrous city. Now, after the beast has burned the woman, he also is thrown into the lake of fire. So why is he burnt? Before Jericho was burned, God instructed them to keep themselves from the accursed thing, lest they make themselves accursed when they take of the accursed thing. But Achan, from the tribe of Judah, decides not to listen and takes of the accursed thing, when he sees among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment and silver and gold, and decides to steal from God. So God commands that Achan be burned, and Israel obeys. The reason he was burned is because God commanded that all graven images or idols be burned when they capture foreign cities. And when Achan took of the accursed thing, he became an accursed thing like the thing he possessed, which in turn possessed him, as I show in Spiritual Warfare Part 1. So the beast, which represents all Israel, is burned because he is an idol, confirming the root of Israel's sins as idolatry. And in that idolatry, she and her posse had murdered everyone in the camp, and they had ascended to heaven and were surrounding God's throne, as we see in Revelation 7 and Revelation 15. Let that sink in. All of the righteous sheep of Israel died and ascended before the destruction of the temple on Tish B'Av 70 AD, the grand finale of the Yom Kippur ceremony. So those who are left are just the product of an adulterous heifer and the lesser of two evil goats, all of whom were worthy of complete destruction. But the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob chose to extend mercy to the scapegoat, and that's why the sons of Jacob are not consumed. So the full picture is that of a red heifer, a bull, and two goats, representing Jerusalem, her idol/lovers, and their wicked children all fornicating together and then being burnt. The sin goat and two calves are all killed, and their blood is sprinkled 7 times before Yahuwah. And while this is the sin bull and goat's final destination, their fat is offered up to God, and the ashes of the heifer are recycled so that the scapegoat can use them to purify himself and become tamim.